At 36,000 feet above the ground, somewhere between Los Angeles and Chicago, a young girl raised her hand in what seemed like a casual gesture. But flight attendant Barbara Chen's 20 years of experience told her this was anything but ordinary. The teenager, who appeared to be around 16, had made the same distinct motion 3 times in the past hour, palm facing forward, thumb tucked in, fingers closing to form a fist. The gesture might have seemed meaningless to most passengers absorbed in their movies or magazines, but Barbara had recently completed the airline's updated safety training. Her heart rate quickened as she recognized the signal that had been making rounds on social media, a silent cry for help. The girl sat in 14C, wearing a worn-out blue hoodie, despite the warm cabin temperature. Her eyes kept darting between her lap and the broad-shouldered man in a business suit seated next to her in 14B. Something about their dynamic seemed off. While they had boarded together, there was no familiar interaction between them. No casual conversation, no shared snacks, not even a single word exchanged since takeoff. Each time Barbara passed their row, the girl would make the signal, carefully positioning her hand so only someone walking down the aisle could see it. The movement was subtle, deliberate, and filled with desperation. The man beside her seemed oblivious, focused intently on his laptop screen. Barbara's mind raced with possibilities, each more alarming than the last. In her 2 decades of flying, she had learned to trust her instincts. Right now, every fiber of her being was screaming that this teenager needed help, and time was running out. With 3 hours left in the flight, Barbara knew she had to act, but one wrong move could put the girl in even greater danger. 2 days earlier, in a quiet suburban town outside Los Angeles, the young girl named Rose had been living a normal teenage life. The 16-year-old lived with her aunt following her parents' tragic car accident 3 years ago. Despite the loss, Rose had managed to maintain good grades and found solace in her love for art, spending countless hours sketching in her room. That fateful morning began like any other. Rose was walking to her part-time job at the local library when she received a message from someone claiming to be a talent scout. The message referenced her digital art portfolio that she had recently posted online. The scout, who introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, praised her work and mentioned an exclusive art program in Chicago with a full scholarship opportunity. For Rose, who dreamed of attending art school but knew her aunt's modest income couldn't support such ambitions, this seemed like a miracle. Mr. Thompson was polite, professional, and shared convincing details about the program. He even provided a website that looked legitimate, complete with testimonials from supposed previous students. After several exchanges, Mr. Thompson explained that interviews were happening that week in Chicago, and the program would cover all travel expenses. Rose, excited by the opportunity but cautious, shared the news with her best friend Lily. While Lily expressed some concern about the rushed nature of the trip, Rose assured her that everything seemed legitimate. She showed Lily the program's website, the professional emails, and even a letter of invitation on what appeared to be official letterhead. Rose's aunt was away on a business trip, and rather than disturb her with multiple calls about an opportunity that might not pan out, Rose decided to leave a note explaining her whereabouts. She convinced herself that at 16, she was old enough to make this decision. After all, everything had been arranged so professionally, the flight tickets were booked, and Mr. Thompson had even arranged for a business associate to accompany her on the flight since she was a minor traveling alone. The morning of the flight, Rose packed a small suitcase, including her favorite sketchbook and the Lucky Charm bracelet her mother had given her. She met Mr. Thompson at a coffee shop near the airport. He was different from his profile picture, older, broader, more intimidating, but he explained that the picture was outdated and quickly introduced her to his associate who would be accompanying her on the flight. As they walked through the airport, subtle red flags began to emerge. Her phone mysteriously stopped working just after they passed security. The business associate, who hadn't smiled once since they met, kept a firm grip on their travel documents. When Rose asked about the other students flying to Chicago for interviews, the answers were vague and quickly dismissed. It wasn't until they were airborne that the full weight of her situation began to sink in. Her traveling companion's demeanor changed completely once they were in the air. His professional facade dropped, revealing cold, controlling behavior. He insisted on keeping her passport in his bag and became agitated when she asked to use the bathroom, accompanying her to the door and waiting outside. Rose's heart pounded as she realized that the dream opportunity had been an elaborate trap. She was now trapped at 36,000 feet with someone who clearly had malicious intentions. Her only hope lay in the viral video she had watched just last week about a discreet hand signal used to alert others to dangerous situations. As the beverage service began, Rose silently prayed that someone would recognize her plea for help. Barbara Chen's decades of experience had taught her to observe passengers while maintaining a calm exterior. As she pushed the beverage cart down the aisle for the second time, she paid careful attention to row 14. The teenager's distress signals had triggered a series of subtle but coordinated actions among the cabin crew. Through seemingly routine cabin checks, Barbara had gathered crucial details. The man's behavior displayed classic signs of a controller. He hadn't allowed the girl to accept any snacks or beverages, answering curtly on her behalf. When she requested to use the lavatory, he had stood up and waited outside, an unusual action that raised immediate concerns. During a quick gossip session in the galley, a cover for sharing observations, another flight attendant, Tom, mentioned that the pair's boarding passes had been purchased less than 24 hours ago. The girl had no carry-on bag, only a small purse that the man kept under his feet, another red flag that contradicted typical teenage travel patterns. Barbara had discreetly photographed the hand signal with her crew phone, comparing it to the safety bulletin she'd recently reviewed. The match was undeniable. This was the same distress signal that had gone viral on social media, specifically designed for situations where verbal communication could be dangerous. The crew's suspicions deepened when they noticed the girl's attempts to make eye contact with other passengers had been met with subtle but firm redirections from her companion. His body language was rigid, defensive, and he positioned himself to monitor her every movement. When Barbara had deliberately spilled some water near their seats, requiring cleanup, the man had refused to change seats even temporarily, insisting on maintaining close proximity to the girl. Through practiced routines of cabin service, Barbara and her colleagues maintained their professional demeanor while documenting every suspicious interaction. They noticed how the girl flinched when the man spoke to her, how she kept one hand close to her face, seemingly hiding fresh tears. The man's laptop screen, briefly visible during drink service, showed no work documents, but rather appeared to be messaging conversations in a language none of the crew recognized. During a routine cabin check, Barbara noticed the girl had written something on a napkin, but before she could get closer, the man had quickly crumpled it and stuffed it into the seat pocket. The girl's eyes had met Barbara's for a split second, filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. As the flight progressed, Barbara's training kicked in full force. She knew they needed to gather more information without putting the girl at risk. The crew had already implemented their subtle passenger distress protocols, but with each passing minute, the tension in row 14 seemed to escalate. The man's facade of businesslike indifference was cracking, revealing glimpses of growing agitation. Time was becoming critical. Barbara had seen similar situations before, but something about this one felt different, more urgent, more dangerous. As she coordinated with her fellow crew members, she couldn't shake the feeling that this flight could be this young girl's last chance for help. The next few decisions they made would be crucial, not just for following protocol, but for potentially saving a life. The next hour aboard Flight 2317 unfolded like a delicate chess game. Barbara had quietly briefed the flight's captain during what appeared to be a routine cockpit check. Captain Reynolds, a former Air Force pilot, immediately grasped the gravity of the situation and initiated the airline's discreet emergency protocol. Through a series of coded announcements that sounded like routine flight updates, the crew positioned themselves strategically throughout the cabin. Tom took up position in the forward galley, pretending to inventory snack carts while maintaining a clear view of row 14. Another flight attendant, Nancy, began a subtle passenger reseating process, moving a deadheading air marshal closer to the situation under the guise of balancing the aircraft's weight. Barbara orchestrated a series of innocent-looking disruptions. She adjusted the cabin temperature, causing several passengers to request blankets. This created natural foot traffic in the aisle, allowing the crew to maintain constant surveillance without arousing suspicion. Each crew member carried a crew phone, documenting every interaction while appearing to handle routine passenger requests. The man in 14B grew increasingly agitated with each passing minute. His composure began to crack when Barbara announced that due to mild turbulence, passengers should remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. He repeatedly checked his watch, his knee bouncing nervously beneath the tray table. The girl beside him had stopped making the hand signal, but her eyes continued to plead with every crew member who passed. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds had discreetly contacted air traffic control using predetermined codes that wouldn't show up on public radio frequencies. Ground authorities were now coordinating with FBI units in Chicago, preparing for various scenarios upon landing. The flight's arrival gate had been changed to a more secure location away from the main terminal. The crew's biggest challenge was maintaining normalcy while preparing for potential escalation. They knew from training that these situations were most dangerous when suspects realized they'd been discovered. Barbara had seen the man's growing paranoia, how he scrutinized every announcement, every crew movement. His laptop had been shut now, his entire focus on monitoring his surroundings and controlling his young companion. Through subtle signals and practiced routines, the crew positioned emergency equipment within easy reach. Medical kits were moved to strategic locations, not just for potential physical emergencies but because they contained sedatives that could be used if the situation turned violent. The cabin crew had transformed from service providers into a coordinated tactical team, all while maintaining their professional smiles and routine service patterns. As they entered the final hour of flight, Barbara caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold, a metallic glint near the man's ankle when he shifted in his seat. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the crew's next moves would need to be perfect. They weren't just preventing a trafficking attempt anymore. They were quite possibly preventing an armed confrontation at 36,000 feet. The moment of truth arrived with breathtaking swiftness. Barbara's team had just received confirmation through a coded intercom message. Law enforcement was in position at Chicago O'Hare, and the flight crew had clearance to initiate their intervention plan. With 45 minutes until landing, they couldn't risk the suspect becoming desperate as the plane descended. The catalyst came when the man in 14B made his first crucial mistake. After hours of vigilance, he dozed off for a brief moment, his head nodding forward before he jerked awake. In that precious instant, Rose seized her chance, making the hand signal one final time while mouthing two clear words to Barbara, "Help me." Captain Reynolds executed the first phase by initiating a fake mechanical check that required passenger cooperation. The cabin lights flickered momentarily as Barbara made an announcement requesting all passengers to close their window shades and remain seated for a pressure system test. This simple action dimmed the cabin significantly, providing the cover they needed. In a choreographed sequence that appeared completely routine to unaware passengers, the crew sprang into action. Tom approached from the front with a beverage cart, deliberately blocking the aisle. Nancy started a detailed safety check from the rear, effectively trapping row 14 between two crew members. The air marshal, who had been positioned nearby, quietly unbuckled his seatbelt. Barbara approached row 14 with a stack of blankets, her practiced smile masking her racing heart. "Sir," she addressed the man directly, "we need to reseat you temporarily for weight distribution during our system check. It's a quick regulatory requirement." Her tone was professional, leaving no room for argument, even as she saw his face darken with suspicion. The next 30 seconds unfolded like a perfectly executed dance. When the man began to protest, his hand moving toward his ankle, the air marshal was already there. Two other male passengers, quietly briefed moments earlier, stood up to assist. Before the suspect could react, he was immobilized, the takedown so smooth and quiet that most passengers assumed it was a medical emergency. Rose was quickly moved to the front galley, where a female off-duty nurse was waiting to comfort her. The man was secured in the rear of the aircraft, under constant supervision. Barbara wrapped a blanket around Rose's shaking shoulders as the girl finally broke down, releasing hours of pent-up terror. Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring, informing passengers they were beginning their descent into Chicago. Many passengers remained unaware of the drama that had just unfolded, a testament to the crew's professionalism and preparation. Those who had witnessed it sat in stunned silence, processing how an ordinary flight had transformed into a rescue mission. As they began their descent, Barbara held Rose's hand, feeling the girl's pulse gradually slow from its frantic pace. Looking into the teenager's eyes, she saw something transform, fear giving way to relief, then to the gradual realization that she was finally safe. The hand signal that had started this entire operation now rested quietly in her lap, its job complete. The next 24 hours unfolded like a whirlwind at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. As Flight 2317 taxied to its isolated gate, a coordinated team of FBI agents, local law enforcement, and victim support specialists was already waiting. The smooth landing belied the storm of activity that would follow. Through the terminal's windows, passengers watched in awe as police vehicles surrounded the aircraft. The man from 14B, now identified as part of a larger trafficking network, was taken into custody immediately. Rose, still wrapped in the airline blanket, was escorted to a private room where trained counselors and medical professionals awaited. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that had been targeting young artists through social media. Rose's case had unknowingly intersected with an ongoing FBI investigation into a trafficking ring that had been using fake art programs to lure teenagers across state lines. Her quick thinking and use of the viral hand signal had not only saved herself, but provided authorities with crucial evidence. 1 year after the dramatic events on Flight 2317, Barbara Chen stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a congressional hearing on airline safety and human trafficking prevention. The case had become a catalyst for change across the entire aviation industry, touching lives far beyond that single flight. The training program she helped develop had already made a difference. In the past year alone, similar hand signals had been recognized by flight crews on 12 different occasions, leading to successful interventions. Airlines worldwide had adopted new protocols, and flight attendant training now included extensive sections on recognizing subtle distress signals and signs of trafficking. Rose, now 17, had transformed her harrowing experience into a mission of hope. While maintaining her privacy, she worked with counselors and advocacy groups to share her story through her art. Her series of powerful drawings, displayed in airports across the country, helped raise awareness about trafficking tactics and the importance of staying vigilant. Each piece was accompanied by information about safety signals and resources for those in danger. The trafficking ring that had targeted Rose was dismantled, leading to multiple arrests across 3 countries. The sophisticated operation had been using social media to identify and groom young artists, but Rose's case had provided the breakthrough authorities needed. Her courage had not only saved herself, but had protected countless other potential victims. Barbara kept in touch with Rose through her aunt, watching from a distance as the young artist flourished. Rose had received a legitimate art scholarship, this time thoroughly vetted, and was using her talent to inspire others. Her original hand signal sketch had become a symbol of hope, reproduced on training materials and safety cards in airplane seatbacks worldwide. The incident sparked a broader conversation about community vigilance and the power of paying attention to subtle cries for help. Schools began incorporating safety awareness into their curricula, teaching students about the importance of trusting their instincts and knowing how to signal for help. Parents became more involved in their children's online activities, learning about the sophisticated ways traffickers targeted young people through their passions and dreams. As Barbara concluded her testimony, she shared a final thought that resonated throughout the chamber. The most powerful defense against human trafficking wasn't just in big operations or sophisticated technology, it was in the simple act of paying attention, of being willing to notice and act when something seemed wrong. Every person who learned these signals, who stayed aware of their surroundings, who took the time to care about strangers, became part of a larger safety net protecting the vulnerable. The legacy of Flight 2317 lived on in changed policies, saved lives, and a renewed understanding that in our connected world, safety often depends on our willingness to look out for each other. Rose's simple hand signal had not only saved her life, but had reminded the world that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the most profound impact.